Hi, this is Susan. I put together 3 videos here on the subject of co-housing. If you've ever felt like you're kind of isolated from your neighbors or from other people, or there's times you just spontaneously like to get together with people, maybe the way it was when you lived in a college dorm or a group house back in those days, here are some things to consider. First, know that you're not alone. Many people share the same feelings. Second, know that one of the greatest predictors of longevity is the degree of social contact that a person has with friends, family, and so on. It seems to be even a bigger factor than diet. Let's start with a PBS report on co-housing.
This is the regular dinner scene at Sættedammet, a co-housing community 45 minutes outside Denmark's capital of Copenhagen. Stig Brink, an architect, and his wife, an artist, and the teenage daughters they've raised here, are responsible for tonight's meal. For themselves and 20 neighbors in the common house.
We eat together 4 times a week for those who want to participate.
What's it like cooking for 25 people? How do you do that?
First of all, we have a kitchen that's capable for it. So we have the tools to do it. And that's very important.
Communal meals are a staple at Sættedammet, where 71 people live in 28 houses, clustered around shared recreational and outdoor spaces, walkways, gardens, and parking, and a common house. Residents are expected to clean shared areas and take turns tending the grounds. Everyone shares resources like laundry facilities, outdoor tools, and play equipment. Small groups of families rotate leading monthly community meetings.
You live in kind of a small village. You know everybody around you, and you share as much as possible. So you are a very close neighbor, and you're kind of depending on each other, but you're not obligated to any strict rules.
The Sættedammet community is made up of a range of singles, couples, retirees, and families with children. Every family has privacy in a home with its own bedrooms, baths, and kitchen. The land is cooperatively owned, but residents own their homes, a structure similar to a condominium association in the US. The cost of homes here is comparable to other homes in the area, but an average-sized household pays about $3,500 a year for communal resources. Sættedammet started 46 years ago and is recognized as the first co-housing community in the world. Britta Bira and her husband Arna were among the first families to move in.
We didn't want our family to spend our lives in an insular way, in a house on a suburban street somewhere. And one day we saw a newspaper ad saying that some people had their eyes on a plot of land and they were looking for 25 to 30 families to buy it and build houses as well as a communal house.
You share and there's a lot more efficiency.
Lisa Berkman, a professor of public policy and epidemiology at Harvard University, says that co-housing harkens back to the kinds of communities that used to naturally dominate our societies.
You know, when you think about the apartment buildings that were designed at the turn of the century, they were designed as 2-family houses or 3-family houses, you know, each on a floor. And those enabled multi-generation households to live together and still have their own housing.
Berkman says that co-housing can reduce social isolation and the detrimental health effects associated with it.
Social isolation relates to the number of ties and the quality of relationships that you have. Religious ties, community ties, work ties. People who are very isolated, who are disconnected, have a mortality rate that's about 3 times as high. That is, they're about 3 times as likely to die over maybe a decade as people who have many, many more ties.
70-year-old Jutta Helle has lived in Sættedammet for 30 years.
It's important to me to be with a mixed group, not just with other older people, because then we would just talk about our diseases and aches and pains. Older people can't give the same energy as younger people can.
So having neighbors and knowing their kids, I think that's just like it's a benefit of having a big family.
Is this replacing the idea of the extended family?
Indeed it is. So I see it very much as the extended family.
It's like nice to have a friend nearby always that you can talk to.
14-year-old Ella Poulsen has lived in Sættedammet her whole life.
It's kind of like everyone's a parent and everybody will take care of the kid if there's something wrong and if the parents aren't there. And I think it's just very safe.
It's estimated that at least 1% of the Danish population lives in co-housing arrangements. In the United States, the Cohousing Association of America estimates there are about 150 communities. Rocky Hill Co-housing in Northampton, Massachusetts was established 12 years ago. It has 28 households with residents ranging from age 2 to 80. With a similar financial model to Sættedæmmet, Rocky Hill has a variety of common spaces, resources, activities, and shared chores.
I love knowing that somebody's out there plowing the path, you know, on a snowy morning. That's lovely. Knowing that there are mixed ages of people who can help with keeping the place up and we have our jobs divided.
Carol Reinhardt is 72 years old and just retired from her job as a hospice coordinator. She's lived at Rocky Hill since its formation.
You don't get up someday in the morning and say, you know, I think this is the day I'm going to have a community. You know, you build a community.
The number of Americans 65 and older is expected to nearly double by 2050. According to the Pew Research Center, 61% say they would prefer to stay in their homes, even when they can no longer take care of themselves. That's compared to 17% who would opt for an assisted living facility. Just 8% would prefer to move in with a family member.
With the aging of the population and the increasing frailty that people will experience as they age, at some point, everybody needs a little help. Americans are particularly vulnerable to social isolation, in part because we value independence so much, and because we're so mobile, and we live in a very, very big country.
Berkman says that while older Americans are especially vulnerable to social isolation, young families often struggle to maintain social networks as they juggle work and family. College professor Gary Felder lives at the Rocky Hill co-housing community with his wife and their 2 young children. He says their social life is built in, unlike other families who don't live in a co-housing arrangement.
You gotta arrange babysitting, and you gotta figure out the timing, and then you gotta rush back, and so on. And that was just never a big deal for us. We would put our kids down, we would throw in a baby monitor, and we would go spend an evening with our friends.
Because you're right next door to the common house.
Absolutely. And if one of our kids woke up, 2 minutes later we were in the bedroom.
Felder admits that this lifestyle isn't for everyone, and about one family a year decides to leave.
The biggest challenge is that you're making decisions with 27 other households. That is the definition of hell for some people.
But Felder says that for his family, the benefits they get from an intergenerational community outweigh the difficulties.
The other thing which our kids get, which is even more rare in this society, is they have regular interactions with elders, with seniors. They're very aware of the whole process of people getting older and retiring and having physical problems and dying.
Rocky Hill residents are coming up with new guidelines to help aging community members, including ride sharing and connecting residents with financial and medical services.
Could we even make a space here in the common house for somebody who lives and is a licensed practical nurse and taking care of several different families who may be in that area of need?
At the Sættedæmmet community in Denmark, maintaining an intergenerational community is getting harder. More than half of the residents are now over 65. The community is encouraging younger families to move in when homes become available. Many longtime residents, like Jutta Helle, don't want to leave their social support network.
We've been a part of creating this and want to feel the benefits that come with getting old in a co-housing community like this.
Do you think that there's something about this community? Does it keep you younger?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I'm convinced that if I lived with elderly people exclusively, I would degenerate. So the fact that I'm living with younger people is a gift on a daily basis.
Intriguing, isn't it? This next video is a trimmed down version of a slideshow that was presented in Colorado by a co-housing developer.
We all recognize that we're living in some rather challenging times now, and they're very frustrating times. when you start to think about the impact that the human race is having on the planet, or at least on our ability as a species to last on this planet. And at the same time, our institutions that we've always relied on, everybody from the government to science and technology to business and commerce to religion, none of them seem to be doing a whole hell of a lot about it. I think Americans are now starting to look at our whole culture in different ways than they were at least 20 years ago when we started working with co-housing. So when we talk about sustainability, especially relative to how we live and where we live, there's three components that I think we recognize. There's economic, social, and environmental. It's not just about saving energy, and it's not just about surviving, our economy surviving, but there's a significant social component. This is a shot of Nevada City co-housing, their common house. They're basically a net zero electric community. I think, sustainability is really a term that kind of has become more common in the last 20 years, but I don't think it really resonates with us unless there's some emotional connection. There has to be a social aspect to it that really speaks to our personal betterment and our happiness. So David Wan lives at Harmony Village co-housing and runs the community garden, but he's an author. He's written the book The New Normal and also Suburbia. It's really talking about the transition that he's hoping to stimulate and that is occurring, and we're starting to see this transition, I think, in a lot of different ways. There's a whole transition movement that started with transition towns in England, and now we've got some of them here in the United States. I think Oberlin, Ohio has got a whole transition component to it. There's almost every place in the United States now is doing things like reestablishing farmers markets and looking at local food culture and really turning back to the us that Pogo's talking about. A great deal of what the sociologists call social capital is being created at this little institution that happens a couple times a week in the summer, and it's because of this complex mix of people coming together. It's not just about coming to buy your vegetables. I mean, there's a whole experience when that the farmer gets and selling it to the end consumer that he doesn't get when he's just putting the food in boxes and shipping it off to Safeway. And there's also all kinds of learning going on, all kinds of connections being made. If you go, it isn't just about selling food. They've got everything under the sun, from the latest energy programs to whatever. And it becomes an institution. When you start to talk about neighborhood community, I think the social capital is a significant factor, just like it is with farmers markets. When you look at the structure of how we connect with each other, and we do it in our immediate families, and then our immediate neighborhood is the next building block of communal structure, and then we go into larger cities and Americans, and we live on the planet. But this particular building block, this fundamental one that's right after our families, is one that I think our American culture, especially in Western culture, has pretty much ignored or not given it much credit of having any real significant value. So it's sort of a neglected link. The other thing that neighborhood does is it really creates a sense of place within us, and it's that same thing I was talking about earlier. If you want sustainability to really work, it's got to resonate. We all have special places. This is where I live, and a few of the other folks here. This is our little neighborhood. We've got 16 units on 1 acre of ground around a common space that looks like this. And the fact that we are in it together, and we run it together, and we do things to make it better together, creates a unique sense of place that does resonate in all of us. So getting back to the American dream, and I'm not going to belabor this because this is the type of slide the architects show all the time. But what I wanted to point out, the house up here in the right-hand corner is actually a house that our company built about 15 years ago in Louisville over here. They were building on half-acre lots. It was about $300,000 house. Today it's worth well over $1 million. The percentage of people that can really afford that American dream is not that great.
1%.
Yeah, that's the one. It might be. Well, this is the kind of thing that we evolved out of trying to have everybody have their own version of the luxury house on the hill. One of the points that I wanted to make with the presentation is there are new models that have evolved. Actually, some of this stuff has been cooking for my whole lifetime, but new urbanism started to gain some importance in the last 20 years. It's basically a way of creating neighborhoods that speak to community. The streets are very walkable, the cars are in the back, off alleys, there's something to see and do, and so they see each other a lot more. And there's mixed uses. Now, in the same time period, co-housing has risen in the United States, and this pocket neighborhood, which is a brand new book that Ross Chapin's done, and I got all excited about it because what he's done is he's been able to show in just these small pockets of housing units that are surrounded by some common space that they share, and they're designed extremely well, that how they really make a difference. The degree of community that's created among the neighbors. We're selling them and we give them out to people because I think it's a very good, it's a beautiful book to start out with, a good coffee table book. So what are the basic components of if you're going to design a neighborhood for community? One way to look at it is there's two basic elements. One is the physical design, which is a lot of what New Urbanism is about, and a lot of what we've been talking about is how do you structure the houses and the open spaces and the places where the design will facilitate people getting connected and people feeling more positive way about where they live and how they live with each other. But there's also this social design, which I think co-housing has dabbled with more than any other group. How do you really connect people socially beyond just a good environment? This has been pretty well neglected or given little value. People are really starting to value well-designed communities. This is Wonderland Hill, which is a development that we actually planned in the 1970s. And it was designed, at least I can claim now, was designed for sustainable community. It's a really good example because, and there's a number of these type of communities around Boulder. Boulder has been leading in the country in terms of creative planning, but the things that really make Wonderland work are the walkability. The housing was clustered, and this was actually done through a whole neighborhood protest that was almost as bad as the Washington, because originally the plan was 6 units to acre, and we had a lot more density. It was a lot more like the Holiday neighborhood is today, and after the neighbors did a petition drive, and then we went through that at about 2 years, and then we went back and got it reapproved at 3¼ units per acre. But we said, the hell with them, we're still going to cluster the housing. And so we ended up with a lot of open space, and if you go there today, there's walkways and bikeways through it all. And it's a very attractive place for people to come from all over, not just the neighbors. And I think that really has created a much greater sense of community. The other thing that was done here, and you can see it duplicated in other developments around town, is by creating small pockets of swimming pool, tennis courts, a little clubhouse here, another one here, another one over there, without huge quantities of people, forced people to get together with their immediate neighbors and figure out how to manage them, for one thing, because these were self-managed associations, and that in itself Here's where the social part starts to begin to come into play with the planning. So this was an early version before New Urbanism, but had a lot of the same components. So when co-housing comes along, you know, in the late 1980s, it was very definitely designed as a neighborhood that speaks to community. This is the Harmony Co-Housing Common House patio, and you can tell this is their common greens in the middle. The cars are all off to the side. The whole idea is that people will see each other coming and going, even to get to their cars, that there's an attractive place for them to hang out like this. And the kitchens are typically on the, towards this community side, and then there's a real effort to balance privacy and community. So we get a community side on the back side of the houses. There might be their living rooms and maybe a bedroom, and a little private yard area. And that was the basic concept behind co-housing. It was intentional design for community. And this is, again, where Brownie and I live at Silver Sage, and this is our outdoor little courtyard, and it gets used for all kinds of things, from a music concert to barbecues to just plain gardening, and all of that has a significant community aspect to it. And then we have a common house, which is typical co-housing, where we share a really attractive indoor spaces. This is our kitchen. We have meals free 2 nights a week in the dining area. This is a sitting area. We've got a media room. We've got more stuff than we ever need. And then one of the important elements in our community, and it's true I think in nearly every co-housing community, is centers around food. And here you can start to see where, I mean, as humans, food are, this is basic. That's how life works, you know. But we get a real nourishment of body and soul out of the whole concept of sharing food together, cooking together. These are shots from our holiday party last year, I think. So what makes a community-based neighborhood? True community-based neighborhood needs to have a shared vision where the neighbors actually have convinced each other that they need to believe in something. And we learned early on, working with co-housing groups, that it was almost every one of them right away went to, well, we want to make a difference. We want our community to be more sustainable. We want to live a more sustainable lifestyle, more energy efficient, all that kind of stuff. And then everybody kind of buys into that as a vision. But there's other visions. You know, you can have a vision of happiness, I think, and make these communities work well. The other thing are the clustered homes around some kind of shared open space, green area that gets shared together. The balance, like I said, the balance between private and community spaces, their utilization of the shared facilities. If you got them there and nobody's using them, or half the people don't use them, that doesn't promote community. So the more participation you can get among neighbors, the better. So being community focused, where you're really emphasizing interaction between neighbors, that's why eating together is a great thing to do. And even in a neighborhood that doesn't have, isn't co-housing, a pocket neighborhood, having a barbecue once a month, or having some kind of a rotating dinner is a really good idea. And then I've felt more and more as I've worked with co-housing the last several years that even though, you know, everybody looks at it and says, oh, you mean we got to run this place ourselves? This is the glue that really makes it work from a community standpoint, is the fact that people are getting together and figuring out how to make it not only operate, but make it better for everyone. The whole process of participation was kind of built into the early co-housing models, because Katie and Chuck, who brought it to the United States, and, you know, Catherine McCammett and Charles Durrett, they were architects, and they figured, oh, okay, well, how do we get these things going? Well, we'll have programming, basically have collaborative design with the people that are going to live there. We don't want them to get too far out of control, but we can program with them. And so workshops like these were common. And the other thing that we've learned is that diversity really generates social capital. And having a diverse mix of people in a community that really bring different interests and skills and talents is really critical to its success. Every community that I've worked with always has at least one tech geek. This guy here in Arizona, he was head of the computer lab for the astrophysics department of the University of Arizona. And this was 20 years ago almost. He figured out that instead of everybody paying $50 a month to be on the internet, that he could run it all through one and everybody could pay $3 a month. And, and he was so proud of it. And at that time it took all this equipment to do that. Of course, technology has changed, but those kind of people are really appreciated in a neighborhood. So are the gardeners. We have beautiful, you can go to almost any community and they have beautiful grounds and gardens. There's always an element, a workshop and crafts element that enhances the place. And then of course, here's Henry cooking with Arthur. Cuisine, eating well. So Annie Russell really did this graph, and I've used it on what it takes to create a successful neighborhood community. And this was really the one we did for Silver Sage. So, but the three important elements for every community were community spirit, and this is the kind of the social side of it, management, and then maintenance. And it's important that the neighbors all are engaged in this in some way that inspires them. And then having I call this a vision. In our case, we called it community support for aging was our vision because we were doing the first senior co-housing community. I'm not so sure that that we shouldn't change that to community support for happiness. Don't you think, Henry? Yeah. Who cares about aging?
Aging scares people.
Yeah, we found that.
It happens to all of us.
But there's, we'll move to the next. I wanted to say a couple things about new urbanism and co-housing, because we've learned over 10 years ago, it was about 12 years ago, Jonathan Rose and Chuck Perry were Jonathan's out of New York City, and Chuck is here in Denver. Had purchased the old Elitch's amusement park, and they were going to do a breakthrough kind of new urbanist neighborhood. And Jonathan's brother-in-law happened to be Peter Calthorpe, who's renowned for starting the new urbanist movement along with Andres Duany. And so I knew Chuck and talked to him about, hey, maybe you should have a co-housing community in there. It might actually stimulate a higher level of community than just a standard new urbanist neighborhood. And there's a lot of affordable housing in this, because that's what they specialize in. And Jonathan loved the idea, and so did Calthorpe. So we got the Hearthstone site, and it was a block, a townhouse block that we just redid. The kids in Hearthstone did this, but the common house is on one corner on the street, and then there's a green in the middle. And this is about 20 units to the acre, with the cars all parked on the outside. The interesting thing, you know, cultural creatives, we identified as being the market for co-housing. So this is the interior courtyard of Hearthstone, and if you can believe this, every unit in there sits on its own boundary. There's no stacked units in there, and yet they're at about 20 units per acre. And this is their common house. And their common house, we deliberately put it out, it addresses the street. It's right at the end of as you're driving through, you see it. So it becomes a prominent building, like a church does in neighborhoods. This is the community side, opening into the center of the community. This is a public side. Their common house gets used for all kinds of things. We promoted the idea that they would really make a difference in a larger neighborhood. We didn't know for sure whether that'd work, but it did. That's all I can tell you now. that they do. They model a community for the larger neighborhood. They're the biggest living room in the neighborhood, so a lot of the things, they run their community gardens and that sort of thing, because they are the more proactive cultural creatives in the group, but they're in the larger neighborhood. So this is our own Boulder version of Cohousing New Urbanism, and I really jumped into this project because I thought it was so interesting. We were able to be one of the 4 developers, the master developer with Boulder Housing Partners, which is really the Boulder Housing Authority. And a lot of it is individual pockets that are as high as 20 units per acre. Both of our co-housing communities are closer to almost right at 20 units per acre. Wild Sage sits here, it's intergenerational. The first one we did, 34 units, and then Silver Sage is here with 16 units. What's great about this neighborhood, and it's true new urbanism, is that it's so walkable. I live here, and my office is there, and I hardly ever have had a car at the office. I just leave the car here, because I've got several different routes, but they always go through this park, and the park is almost always with people in it, kids with, people with their dogs. We've got restaurants and things up here. This is Proto's. It's underneath where my office is. And across the street is Spruce Confection. So it's a very walkable neighborhood. This stuff is starting to all come together. This is Wild Sage and their little common green and their common house. And there's a ton of kids that live there. And then this is the interior of their common house. And this was a meeting that was going on for the larger neighborhood on talking about sustainability. So there's a deliberate kind of process going here that really makes it a significant transition in terms of people's awareness, and they're willing to participate in solving the problem rather than just worrying about it. And again, it's the largest living room in the neighborhood, so the co-housing really fits and plays an important role. This may be the next step, and we're seeing these emerge all over, and a lot of planning. We've got so much depression going on in the housing industry that not very many of them are actually emerging out of the ground yet, but this is getting closer. This is Geos in western Arvada, where Norbert is attempting to do a energy plus, literally. I mean, they'll produce more energy than they use, the housing, but there's a lot more to it than that. This is very good new urban design, and there's an agricultural element. There's a possibility of even raising crops in the floodplain along this bikeway that goes along the creek. There's 2 co-housing communities planned into it. So it's a comprehensive way of addressing a lot of the issues that are bubbling in our culture now. I've seen probably a half a dozen of these kinds of projects starting to emerge. This is not the sort of thing that our mainstream production builders are real comfortable with yet, but I think we'll see this transition, especially as we come out of the recession. And in terms of energy efficiency, co-housing has always been a leading edge. When we did the very first co-housing community in Colorado, Nyland, it was branded by what was then Public Service, that most energy efficient new community built that year. And that was done with a cost increment of probably less than 5%. It took those people in that community that were really struggling with affordability, they had to get together and make the decision that they wanted to build the houses that much better. The same thing's true in Nevada City. The people here decided to, that are living there, decided to put all the collectors on the roof and make it a net zero electric development. And they did that with their share of the residual or profit from their project. So I'm going to give a short plug here for Washington Village, because here's where we're trying to put all of these ideas together. It's really looking comprehensively at all of the aspects of sustainability, not just how efficient and how green the building is. One of the attributes at Washington Village is this historic building is being preserved and converted into a number of high quality living unit. What makes Washington Village a lead community, and probably the most sustainable one that we've done yet, is the neighborhood contributes significantly. This is the ideal walkable neighborhood. It even has a store named after it. It's walkable, bikeable, the main bike path on 13th Street. You can get to the downtown Pearl Street Mall on about a 10 or 15 minute walk, or 3 to 5 minutes on your bike. The skip bus goes right by the front of the place every 10 minutes on peak times. You don't need a car if you are brave enough to go without. The other thing that Washington Village has that speaks to the same things that I've been talking about is this courtyard in here is right off from where the Common House will be, just like it is at Silver Sage and Wild Sage. It has a public side on Broadway, and then the community side is back here for people dining. So that'll become a gathering place for the residents of Washington Village that will naturally stimulate community. And it's connected through to this park here that is right on the corner of 13th and Cedar, that these single-family homes surround. They're a part of the community. When we started to look at these houses, this is an original drawing that we submitted to the city, and we thought they were just going to be, you know, pretty much standard Boulder version, pretty expensive houses because they're the land is so expensive. But we started to think, well, maybe, and in collaboration with Norbert, maybe we could make those single-family homes a model of this net zero that GEOS and these other communities are envisioning, and we could further the cause. Our company did Solar Row about 5 years ago, where we really made an attempt to get to net zero homes and a series of townhomes, and these are actually right out in the Holiday neighborhood. Now they look like an early attempt, because we're seeing production builders now are beginning to do net zero. You build the house right so that it doesn't use much energy, and then you put enough solar collectors on it, you can call it net zero. Now, we learned a lot in this process, so the next step are these little houses that are on the park at Washington Village, which look like they're sweet little cottages along the park. When you really look at them, they're fairly long, but they're not huge houses. They're anywhere from 13 to 16 or 17 square feet, plus a two-car garage off the alley. And then most of them have a little second-story element that might be a studio, could be a second master suite, but then they have another 1,600 square feet potential in the basement that can be finished. And we're doing things like daylighting basements. So here we're starting to take the concept of building a more energy efficient, sustainable house with solar and all this stuff on, and looking at how does that relate to livability and to the emotional experience you get in living in the houses. So here in the traditional co-housing, here's the front porch right where all the neighbors are walking by. Every house has a private courtyard, so it has like an outdoor room that the house wraps around with a good south orientation. The houses have light being brought in high, especially from a south orientation, for a lot of daylighting. Like in this particular house, this is like an artist studio over the garage. So it's a more creative way to look at housing. There's been a lot of participation going on. Those of you in Washington are all kind of cringing. These are really early slides, and you have to recognize that this is the kind of stuff that creates the glue that is community. But it isn't necessarily easy, and that's been our, when I first started with working with co-housing, I thought, oh, every builder's going to want to do this. And we're going to see a lot of these kind of communities, because this is really the answer to building a better product and a more sustainable product. And then I realized that there wasn't that many people that really had the appetite for it. And a lot of it is that you have to get past this point that the only way you can be satisfied is by buying something or having somebody give you something. You have to actually participate, and participation does create that dopamine that makes it all work for us. So let me just conclude by saying, here's some of the things we've learned through co-housing the past 20 years about sustainability and community. So one of the things is working together and building community definitely has its challenges, but it yields rewards that are for everybody that are far in excess. I love this slide because this is when I was in Bellingham, Washington, at a community that we developed there, and this guy that lives up here built this thing in the shop, probably with the help with some of the other guys that knew a lot more about it. And then he couldn't figure out how it wouldn't go up the stairs and get in there. So he got the neighbors together. I don't know what this is. It looks like some rigged fishing line or something. And they all got together and hoisted this thing over the top so he could get it in through the door of the Now that's community in action. and the only thing you can say about it that it's not the most efficient way to do it, but they were sure having a hell of a good time with it. Okay, now the second thing that we've learned is that a participatory neighborhood where people actually work together with their neighborhood to make decisions. This is the Harmony community, and having a community meeting out on their common lawn in the summertime. But that is what creates the social capital. You have to get involved with your neighbors. You can't just buy a new urbanist house. That'll get you part way there, but it won't get you all the way. Okay, and then this gets more into the emotional side of it. If you do it right, it really creates a difference in our well-being, and everything from our health to how we feel about life. And this was a jam session when I was at Nevada City Co-housing last year. I think it was their Harvest Festival, and a bunch of musicians were sitting out there, and then other people talking. It was just great stuff happening. And the last one is, we've known this for years. Humans are social animals. The problem is that we've tried to buy our way out of it, and because there's certain downsides to being social, but we really are the happiest when we care together about the quality of our lives, the security, beauty, spirituality. It really makes a difference. So these are all the co-housing communities that I've been involved in, that our company has, and our sister company, Co-housing Partners in California. And I did the ones in red. So I hope, I hope you got the message. and that's the end of our slideshow. This is kind of how we view our lot in life, to take people that are brave enough down the rabbit hole of community. So well, thank you.
So that was a very informative talk by a man who helps people develop co-housing, and you can get more information at one of these partner websites here. It looks like you can probably get people to help you bring your group together and see how to structure it and how to design it, finance it, and get it built. Most of these are simply organized as townhouse or condo developments with an HOA. Finally, we'll look at the pros and cons of co-housing communities that are especially for seniors.
I actually had this idea when I was in college, like, wouldn't it be great to grow old with your friends on a piece of property, and everybody had their own little cabin, and there was a great house that you would gather in and have meals, and doesn't that sound like fun? In 2004, I Googled senior co-housing and actually was shocked that I found some things, because I thought, of course, I was the first person who thought about it.
Co-housing is more or less an old-fashioned notion of how people can live together in a village-like, community-like setting where people know each other, care about each other and support each other.
I was looking and exploring for different types of home situations for my father and came upon co-housing, and I thought, gee, that's a really unique but great idea about being able to live in community and be able to have neighbors that help neighbors and know each other.
Too many seniors are isolated. Too often having the single-family house that was more than appropriate when they were raising several children, not appropriate when 70, 80 years old, or even 65, where the house becomes not only a burden cost-wise, but also a burden at every other level.
We retired to Truckee, California. It was a winter when there was extraordinary amounts of snow. When a friend mentioned that there was this presentation going to be happening in Truckee about co-housing, which I'd never really heard of before.
We had a big house and lots of property that was going to mean a lot of work. We just felt like it was time for a next step, that we needed to be active and closer to people.
My husband was in hospice. And my daughter came to visit me to see her dad once more. And then we saw in the paper and advertising that Katie McCammond was giving a presentation about co-housing. And I had never heard of it before. And we both said, let's go, let's go. So we went to the presentation. So when it was finished, we said, Mom, that is the perfect thing, totally the perfect thing for you. And I said, I think so too.
Katie McCammond and I do a 2-day workshop called Getting It Built. And it basically takes 50 strangers and puts the tools in their tool belts that help them see the possibility for organizing a co-housing community. Very much around finances, it's a big part of it. How to get your money in and how to get your money out. And I'd say about 50% of the time it is the group who buys the land. And 50% of the time it's somebody like Katie or I or some other developer.
Co-housing communities evolve over time. It isn't like all at one fell swoop 30 households come together and go, yes. It's iterative. You might have 6 initially and then 2 more and then 1 more. And sometimes a project may not even 100% sell out till people have moved in and there's 2 or 3 units left over.
There's always vacancies that they need to fill, and that's where people like me come in who are willing to pay a slightly higher price to buy in once it's completed.
They're typically legally constructed as a condo, so there's an HOA, and the community decides what that HOA fee will be and what it will cover. So you're maintaining control, which again I think is a very important part of aging.
The residences are typically universal design where you don't have any issues with mobility. You have walk-in showers. You have countertops at the right level so that you can continue with the day-to-day chores, bathing, eating, getting around in a way that you're not going to have to leave your home if you suddenly have any mobility issues.
The design of the place, which when you think about it are really restrictions, like having the parking lot that you have to park in close to your house, except for unusual circumstances. But that's done on purpose so that you have to walk by places to get to your own house. So you're constantly exposed to your neighbors. We're all supposed to have a front porch that you can sit on. That's one of the design criteria for the house.
We each have individual homes. They're smaller, I guess, than the average American home would be. We range here from 325 square feet on up to 1,200. Things are designed that way for a reason, so that we tend to get out of our homes more and interact more. We have the common house where we do share meals and get-togethers and parties and things like that.
The building is laid out as 2 3-story wings on either side of a common core, which is where our common house is. Common kitchen, a common eating area, which is also used as an entertainment area, as a meeting area. We have common laundry facilities. In the common house, we also have 3 guest rooms, so that individually we don't have to have an extra bedroom for those times when a guest comes.
It's really the community that says, okay, we want a gym and we want a library and we want a multi-purpose space and we want a meditation room.
At the same time, and probably just as important as doing that, is really starting to coalesce as a group. As people kind of enter into the idea of, okay, there's a group of people that want to live in community and create a co-housing community.
When we first came, we had dinner with a couple of the families that lived here already. We tried to spend as much time with them as we could. Elderberry requires that you visit 3 times before you can join, and you have to attend 1 business meeting, maybe 2, which is a frightful experience for a new person.
Everybody believes that their own life will be more convenient, more practical, more economical, more interesting, more fun, more healthy, if they give cooperation the benefit of the doubt.
Getting along with 25, 30 other people, yeah, it's not necessarily easy, but it's worthwhile.
I hardly ever do a public presentation when somebody doesn't ask me, hey Chuck, what if a jerk moves into your co-housing community? Generally speaking, if you're grading against 20 people are grading against you. So it's not very sustainable. And there have been a couple people who have, rotated themselves out, let's say. Nobody would ask them to move. We don't have to, because you're just not going to be happy here.
Most people come out of a single-family home where they're used to making all the decisions themselves. In co-housing, a lot of that is taken out of your control. You have to consider the finances of the community as a whole, the individuals within the community. You have to take into account different viewpoints and perspectives that you might not want to take into account.
I would encourage anybody who's coming to a co-housing community to think about what your commitment is to work, because you can pay for things. You can pay for all the maintenance and everything else, but the other thing that co-housing tries to be is to be affordable. The more you hire out, the more your monthly assessments are going to come up.
And one of the beauties of co-housing is, instead of having to do everything, which you do if you're an individual homeowner, you get to choose. You get to pick things that are more suited to what you want to do right now.
We have different teams, and they do maintenance on the building, and they do gardening, and many different teams. And I am actually more or less excused from these teams because I'm too old. I can do some things. I can coordinate, for instance, a cook team. I come up with a recipe.
In some ways, it's a lot of work, but in other ways, it's less work. I have not changed a fuse or, done painting maintenance in 4 years here. So in the jobs that we are cooperating together, I spend less time, and I can ignore some of the jobs that I really don't like.
Most of us view common meals as an essential glue to holding the community together, because it's both a time on a cook team when you work with other people, but it's also a time when you're eating with other people to socialize and learn what's going on.
We have 2 children, adults, who are doing well in life. I hope that I can let them have their lives without anxiety about me. They are much more comfortable with this because they know that my neighbors have their phone numbers, and if there's any crises that I can't call them myself, they will be called.
None of my family lives close by. It's so nice. You have Skype, you have the email, and we had family reunions. So as long as I can do that, I do not feel so removed from my children. And they are very, very happy that I have it so good here. Many old people are very lonesome, and so I don't have that. I mean, we are so social, aren't we, here? Sometimes you just have to close your door not to be social anymore.
One of the things that we've noticed, particularly in this community, is though there are certainly people who have children, practically none of them have children nearby. So it makes it a little different because these people become your family. And when they become your family, that means that you need to take care of them, they need to take care of you.
Many co-housing communities have an extra unit or 2 that are intended to be guest units, family comes to visit, things like that. And in senior communities, it's with an eye towards having a caregiver live there ultimately.
But then the issue comes, what happens when somebody gets Alzheimer's? What happens when somebody breaks a hip? When it comes to toileting and bathing, volunteers are gone. That's hard, personal work. So the issue then becomes, what do you do in that kind of situation? There was a hope here, and I know there's a hope at other communities, that you could have a caregiver house. We began here to think about the logistics of it. We're 18 households. To devote one of those to somebody who is purely a caregiver, it didn't make sense socially, it didn't make sense economically, and we don't know how it's going to work out. We're going to have to just trust that when people need caregivers, that we'll be able to get them from the outside community. They'll come in, they'll help, we'll help each other, and it'll work somehow. I think, though, that most co-housing communities, senior co-housing communities, are beginning to also realize that you reach a point where, whether you want to believe it or not, there are going to be some people who have to leave. I think that's something that all senior co-housing communities are going to face.
We started in our church. There were a bunch of us that were closely connected. We thought that we were getting older, and so some of the people were getting pretty frail. We decided we should sort of somehow live closer together to help each other out. Our average age now is about 90, so we were 10 years ago or so, we were around 80. Some of the men, anyway, were a bit wondering if they really wanted to move into an older community. But anyway, they did, with a little help from their wives.
We didn't have any choice. We're just getting older, right? I had friends, and we wanted to be together. This kind of arrangement just sort of gradually evolved.
We'd found this place here, which is almost an acre, and we thought that we could put up 8 units here pretty well.
We didn't want to be in some great big housing development. We wanted to be with a smaller group of people.
One of the things that we did to sweeten the deal for the city council was to designate it as an affordable apartment. And there's certain requirements that the city has as to what rent we can charge and what income the person that would move in would have. We really didn't know what we wanted at first, so it was kind of open. Can you cook for 12 people? We started with 12 people. And what kind of caregiving experience do you have? Do you drive a car? You know, just kind of basic things that we started with.
Somebody that fulfilled those requirements of being low income could have the opportunity to have a wonderful place to live, people that would support them, possible job here as well, and get them on their feet. I was one of those people. I didn't have a job. I am college educated. I was a single parent, but you know, finding a job out there was really hard. Glacier Circle fell into my lap. When I moved in upstairs, and I was just sort of the housekeeper for the common house here. And then my part here just grew.
She's like a house mother, you know. I remember college days, people who are of good character and goodwill.
Most of the time everything works really smoothly. I wondered where my pills had gone, or my ointment for my aching joints. But she knew. Next March, I'll be 100. It's not as bad as most people think. It's mainly because I live here.
There is a tremendous difference between the intergenerational co-housing and ourselves. And a lot of us feel that we kind of miss younger people. You know, in order to go to the intergenerational things, you need to make your choice early. And we did wait quite a while, till age 80.
What I would suggest that everybody has to do is really, you know, take some time to do a little deep thinking about where where you want to be and how you want to live in 10 years or 20 years, because before you know it, you know, it's going to be here, and the sooner you start kind of preparing yourself and really planning for the life that you want to have, the happier you'll be. And it's all about, you know, being happy until you're gone.
I'm not completely useless here. I'm actually glad that I'm realizing that I'm contributing something, even though I'm old. And I think one day I can be sort of an example how you age. Well, that's what I'm trying to do. And it seems it is being appreciated, I think.
These look like charming places to live. You know, there's also other options that I've read about and seen stuff on before, including ways to redesign suburban neighborhoods. If you happen to have a situation where you can take down backyard fences and make sort of a common area between standard suburban houses, maybe build a casita in the middle that people could share, that's another option without necessarily upending your whole life. So thanks for watching. And I hope this was good food for thought.